This is important because the process that we followed was known to the professional services community right from the start. It was well defined. They knew how we were going to evaluate, and they were able to provide proposals to us, submittals, in accordance with how they knew we would be evaluating. You can read the bullets that we've placed on this slide. I would just want to say to you that we have been very transparent all along the way as we've worked through this process. All communications with the outside world have come through the procurement office. That has been from myself and from my assistant, Kathleen Booker. There's been no direct contact with the professionals who have been charged with evaluating the meat of the proposals. This has been very strictly observed, and the committee has been with me 100% all along the way on this process. And so I would just say to you this evening that we have done this strictly. We have done it in accordance with law, in accordance with board policy, and in accordance with best practices of public procurement.
Mr. Fazakli, I have a question. Were you present for all of the interviews and the evaluations?
Yes, Mr. Rice, I was there for the whole thing.
Okay. And the other question is, for any firms that weren't selected, is there a follow-up process that they can sit in with you to see how they were graded, and if they would like to work for the district in the future, where they might need to improve, at least in terms of the committee's perspective?
Yes, sir. There will be such a process followed. And I would like to, you know, with almost 90 proposals that have been received by the district on this project, I am trying to keep the design and construction team as free as possible to do the work that they have to do to move the project forward. I'm trying to communicate myself with my department on a follow-up requests for information, which I've been very transparent about, follow-up requests for meetings and so forth. With regard to the previous professional services bid, which resulted in our bringing Jacobs on board, we've had several follow-ups with those particular proposers, and I've been able to work those so that those proposers have been happy with our response, but yet at the same time, I've been able to keep the design and construction team free to do their work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A little further explanation. I'm sorry.
Mr. Rosenthal, did you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you. A little further explanation on the AE selection is that we have been explicit in what following Bob's direction. So he has, Jim, been an integral part of the evaluation process. All the respondents came from the district's RFQ, excuse me, for professional services. There were 87 firms that responded back, 40 of which were architects, 104 were engineering. In total of 144. Now, the delta between the 87 and the 144 is that some firms applied or responded to more than one particular discipline. So when you broke them all out, you had a total of 144 firms that showed interest. There was a 4-person evaluation team put together, combined of Jacobs and the district. And we broke the evaluation into 2 phases. The first phase was qualifications, responses to the RFQ questions. So we had a scorecard, and each evaluator evaluated the respondent by his answers and how he responded to the RFQ. Some obviously did better than others. There are some very good firms that did not make the list because they didn't answer and respond as well as others did in the RFQ. So that was taken in consideration. tried to keep the process as analytical and straight line as possible. The facts are the facts. And minimize subjectivity, which you still have a little bit of it when it comes in, but to be very fair and have apples to apples. Phase 2, once we did that, Bob and his group checked the financials and the references and actually came up with a score, for them. But each of the evaluators had their own independent review of the drawings, scored and turned into the district for final computation. And then once we got that done, we interviewed. And we felt that we had 14 architects that out of the 40 that we would probably use with the district. So we evaluated those 14, which actually gave us one spare in case for some reasons we can't negotiate or something falls through. And we did them, set up interviews, and we interviewed each and every one of the firms. And they received a score from their interview process. Bob again took that back, put it in his formula, and it came out with the top 14 ranked firms, which actually gave us a pool. We did not pick the architects based on how they ranked. It virtually gave us a pool of consultants that the team felt comfortable with that could do the work. We did assign the architects, or we matched the architects to the work that we felt matched the firm's experience and capabilities. Some firms didn't even submit as a new school architect, but they had experience in a renovation or something. So we took out some were engineering. So we really matched the firm's capability with what they're being asked to perform out of the top ranked 4. So I've worked with many districts through the years in different fashions and a way of selecting it, and I can say I think this was by far the most honest, transparent, thought-out process and fair process of all the ones we've done. So I think it's defensible. Obviously, you'll get people want to come back and ask how they ranked and what they can do better and all that, so that's all open as well. But I think we're very comfortable with the firms that we picked. I think the district will be satisfied, hopefully, with their results.
If I could just add one more comment. Max mentioned earlier the small business initiative, and while by policy the small business initiative takes effect at the construction phase, I would just like the board to know that we're following the spirit of the initiative as well as the letter of the initiative. Of the architects that we're recommending to you this evening, 2 of those architects are certified SBE programs, and 4 more could be. They would qualify if they went ahead and applied for one of our approved certification agencies.
So moving forward on selection of professional services, we're going to tentatively bring the next round of professional services forward in May, and that includes the balance of what I call the owner's professionals, and those include the HVAC test and balance, the land surveying, the geotech and material testing firms, and the commissioning agents. We actually talked about this today, and we were trying to set up interviews tentatively for this Friday. We're going to maintain the same process. We're going to do the interviews and vet these firms fully. And then in June or July, to be determined depending on how this next round goes, we would be bringing forward firms for MEP engineering, structural engineering, environmental science, asbestos, traffic engineering, and roofing. Those are oftentimes considered architects, consultants, and so to get moving immediately on phase 1, we do not believe we need any of those hired directly by us, but in the future we might potentially need those types of firms for projects that are either district projects not associated with the bond, or just depending on how the packages fall out when we go through phases 2 and 3. So there will be more professional services coming in the next couple of months.
Okay, the next slide, pretty simple slide, excuse me, but we have decided, the district have decided to use Prologue. Well, Prologue will be our bond program reporting program. So it's going to report schedule, budget, progress, and the such. And again, a lot of work has been done and we're getting close, but more needs to be done to reconcile how the reporting and the numbers come out of Prologue and how they marry up with PeopleSoft, the district's existing accounting system. So that's being worked on now. And then the Prologue will develop a monthly report, which is actually your next slide. This is a sample slide, but every month, every school will have a report similar to this. The top piece is your schedule, so it will have a planned and actual bar as the project progresses through the different phases. The middle section is your budget piece, and it talks about how you're doing on your budget items that we've identified. The bottom piece is basically just a picture, statics, or comments or something of each project, and the right-hand corner is just an overall shot of the current budget versus what's been committed. So each school will have an independent report, all of which will roll up to an executive-type summary report. It's going to be posted, I believe, on the district's webpage.
Yes, sir.
So anyone can log in and look at their particular school of interest or whatever. There's more layers to this, obviously, but this is what I think the district has chosen to see on a monthly basis.
And these different categories do lay out the different requirements from our recent audit, including original budget, budget changes, commitments, and so we'll be able to track all the things that the audit has required of us.
So that was actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I'd forgotten it. Most of this, especially the reporting, was the audit that y'all received for your 2007 bond program was taken in consideration. Things that the auditors picked up, we're trying to make sure they won't answer it again. It'll be all in your bond program. The last slide is what's next. And so we got to finalize the master schedule, as we spoke of earlier. We need to finalize what we're calling the baseline budgets for every project, and as we get them bundled. The reporting structure, the Prologue, and again, how it ties back in with PeopleSoft. Further bid package and scope of work assignments, primarily for phases 2 and 3. That needs to be done. And then the AE assignments have yet to be matched with those bid packages for primarily phases 2 and 3. We're in the process of working on your middle school and your elementary ed specs. And one to probably follow will be your career tech ed spec that hasn't been developed yet. And you need to make a little more decision on that one. We need to complete the design standards and guidelines. So we're in the process of working on that. Excuse me. And last but not least is the procedures manual that we're working on for the bond program. Again, taking consideration of what the auditors picked up in the last bond program. So I feel we've accomplished a lot of work in a short time, but we got a long way to go. But we're getting there.
We have some more slides. We can take questions now or continue through the presentation.
Well, do we have questions now? Yes.
I have a question.
I think maybe best to do it in chunks and then
Yes, ma'am.
we can be more focused. All right.
Bryce, go ahead.
Mr. Bryce, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you a couple questions. One, are all of these new schools slated to be LEED certified?
Yes, it's LEED certified, up to 49 points. I actually think, Jim, we'll get more than 49, but the objective is up to 49 points, and that gets you certified.
Okay. The civil work that you're getting ready to undertake, are you going to consider the low-impact design in the civil work in the parking lots, maybe putting in a bioswale in some of these parking lots? I was at a conference this past weekend and had it.
Yeah, I didn't go to that session, but, I'm going to say yes, but I don't, be honest with you, I don't know the full scope of what has to happen at every project. But there is drainage problems and,
Okay.
Stuff like that needs to be considered while you're doing it. In fact, I'd like to replace the asphalt parking lots with concrete if the budget will allow. Because you got a lot of asphalt parking lots out there that you know as well as I do, it's continual maintenance.
Yeah.
So,
At a minimum, the drive lanes would need to be concreted and
Are we going to replace any parking lot lighting?
where
And-
needed.
and if we are-
Adding it as well,
I'm sorry?
and adding it if needed as well.
Okay. What kind of, are we considering LED parking lot lighting?
yes, sir, we are. We're actually, in our in-house projects, that's the direction we're going, so that will be our preference when we speak to the engineers, yes, sir.
Okay. And then
Our
you,
parameter for that, Jim, excuse me, will be what was the budget that was
Yeah.
forecast for. So as you know, we could well exceed that budget, so we need to take always the budget in consideration.
right, okay. Speaking of the budget, what is the percentage of the construction cost to the program budget? I know you were breaking out the soft costs and so forth. I just wondered if you had a percentage. Are we 64% construction and the balance soft or something like that?
You know, we haven't done that conclusively, but it's probably going to be 65, 70%. When it's all said and done.
Last question on this. You commented when you were interviewing the architects that you were looking at some prototypical projects that they had done. How are we going to design the new schools going forward, the new ones? Do we have teacher involvement in that? Do we have, because in 3 years, every graduating class, every high school graduating class, beginning in 2018, will have been born in the 21st century. And so I just want to make sure we're designing schools for the 21st century and not the 20th century.
Right. You know, answer part of that? Or
Yes, sir. With regard to our ed spec, we are fresh off elementary 46 and 47. So our goal is to, in the update of our current ed spec, we would use lessons learned from those two schools for the next round of schools. And as we engage these architects, we're going to try to leverage their knowledge to update the ed spec for the next round.
Well, what about teachers? Are we going to have any of our teachers look at any of these designs? I mean, what's happening with the library, for example? And I'm hearing that, I'm seeing pictures of pre-K students. They've got iPhones, they've got iPads. They're really connected more than I am, and they're learning stuff outside the classroom. And I'm hearing about the need for collaborative spaces where we still have classrooms, but we also have spaces where the kids are working on projects together, things like that.
I can say I feel comfortable in saying that the new designs moving forward will have 21st century considerations strongly built into the ed spec. And that's going to be dependent upon the district's wishes on how far they want to take some of these ideas. But that certainly needs to be part of the consideration. We've been told that we won't have a prototype, but we will be designing schools for that particular need and that community with the consideration of the district's ed specs. I'm not fully aware when we have the principals on board when that occurs, and I'm sorry I don't have that answer.
Well, are we gonna include teachers in the design or not? Yes or no?
We will engage each architect and see if we can get that done. To Ron's point, if a principal is not named, that is a difficulty, but we can work through that. And I think we could come up with a collaborative set of teachers to work through that. I have done that in the past with success. And I think what it also helps you do is at the end of the day, you get buy-in on the school and you generate excitement and you deliver what they need. And so, to your point, I think we need to work that way towards that, yes, sir.
I'd like to speak, and hopefully not out of turn, but I'd like to think we would form a committee from the primary and secondary curriculum folks that would represent, in the absence of a principal, until he gets assigned, he or she gets on there. So
Maybe we could have a workshop on that at the right time when we start the next school or something. We can look at that. All right,
Sure.
thank you.
That's a good idea.
Didn't we have a committee for 47, and we had some involvement from some teachers and principals or something? It seems like we did. And so that seems, as a process, we've tried that. I don't know if that's going to be in the procedures manual or not, but maybe it is. What about the just picking up on something Mr. Rice said about the ed specs? So we've floated this around for quite a bit of time, like 2 years. But is that sort of coming together such that it's going to come to the board and we're going to see conceptually what this looks, what we're talking about? Or are we, or do you see that going school to school? Or what is your vision? Maybe I don't.
I can answer the parts I can answer. The design manager,
That's
Chuck.
very wise, Mr. Cleaver, to only answer the parts you can answer.
Thank you. I don't know that I meant it just like that, but the design manager, Chuck Dunham, is actually working right now with our team. I believe it's Ashley and Tom on both of those items. And so to the first piece, yes, we're going to have that item together in the next 30, 45 days. And yes, we can bring that to the board if that is the board's desire. We certainly can.
Well, I'm not exactly sure, except I know in the past, it seems Mr. Rice, in 2011 or 2012,
12.
that the ed specs were brought to the board and they were approved by the board. We've talked, bantered this back and forth over the last couple of years, and I don't know I'm not exactly sure what's involved in ed specs, so I don't know what the right thing to do is. Does anybody have a comment?
We've got two schools, primarily, elementary and your middle school, and then later on, possibly your career tech. So those are the two ed specs we're focused on right now. The previous ones that the board did approve is, obviously, that's the primary. That's what we're using right now, currently. That's the basis. And then the team, as Max spoke of, are going back and updating, if they need updating, or they may need correction or whatever. So that would be formed, your new ed spec, and I would suspect they would come back to you for your review and approval.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because I'm the only one still on the board who saw them. So a review of that for the whole board would be appreciated.
Yes, sir.
And then the second time you'll see them, Ms. James, is each architect will bring to the board a presentation of their schematic design that does meet the district's ed specs and program. So you get an opportunity to see it there as well.
Right, and that's great. I just don't want the cart coming before the horse. In other words, if we don't have the conceptual ideas, when we talk about, when Mr. Rice mentions things like collaborative spaces and 21st century design, and we start talking about technology uses and other types of learning environments that seem to be interesting and effective, I'm just suggesting that maybe we start thinking about those sooner rather than having somebody put a lot of work into a schematic design, and then we're like, well, wait a minute, why are we doing it like this? Why are we doing it like this? And we had even some conversations about special ed spaces and what that might look like. So I'm just wanting to get the work in the right order and
Yes,
wanting
ma'am.
to get the information to the board in the right order. I understand we have a tremendous amount of information, but Mr. Cleaver, I would really appreciate it if we could work on getting things in the right order so that the board feels very comfortable moving forward on this tremendous volume of projects. And we have, if we need to have extra time, if we need to have extra workshops, whatever that means, so that we're knowledgeable and up to speed, and we've given the appropriate level of input. I think, we need to figure out what that is, and then we need to have the opportunity to do it. Instead of getting something and saying, this isn't what we thought at all, and having to throw it back at you, or throw it back at an architect, which is frustrating for everyone involved.
Yes, ma'am.
So those are my thoughts.
The other thing that really, we touched on it very briefly, but does run parallel, is what we're called the design standards. So that's a process that's running similar to your ed specs that will identify the district preferences on systems and not necessarily spell out a specific project, but it'll have a performance of spec that's associated with things that the district prefers. And we'll work with Long on the technology and the chief back there with the security and cameras and stuff like that, and they will be a consideration for certainly the new schools as well as the additions and renovations.
And is it my recollection that we talked about updating these design standards as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And has that been done yet?
No, ma'am, we're actually in the process of revising the design guidelines and standards as well.
Okay.
Same team with Chuck as our rep from Jacobs in the.
All right, and you're looking at 30 to 45 days, I think.
Yes, ma'am,
you
for the
said.
reasons you stated. In other words, we're about to get these architects on board, and really, before they even begin working on their schematic designs, like you have all said, they need to know what our vision and our forward look is. So that's the right order, the cart before the horse. They have to have that document to do their work.
Okay, so that's the critical path.
Yes, ma'am.
So, okay, so along those lines, and you used the term that I was going to use, cart before the horse. Seems to me we really haven't, as a board at least, haven't really decided on what these designs may look like. These things are, a little bit into the future. Do we really know what we need out there for some of these schools? We haven't seen PASA updates. I thought we were going to be getting some recent ones. I don't think we've gotten them, right? Weren't we supposed to get a presentation pretty soon?
Next week.
Okay.
Next week, yes, sir.
So we haven't seen those. We don't really know what these school capacities are. And twice in the past 15 minutes, you've mentioned using past experience. And then you just talked about getting these architects on board so they know what we want. Well, when I look at the selection, we're in the process of 2 schools right now, but yet none of those folks seem to be on the list for any of the next 3 schools. And it would seem to me that they kind of know what we're looking for. They kind of know our vision, but yet they're not there.
Yes, sir, and that's what I was saying. We're taking those lessons learned, and that's what we're incorporating into the design guideline now. The lessons learned from those 2 schools to get moving with this process.
I would think some of those folks would be pretty much up front with the lessons learned. Again, I think that the same things that Ms. James brought up, I think we need to have those conversations before we start awarding. I don't feel comfortable awarding these positions until we really know what we want. I mean, there was a big discussion about Elementary 47. Was it we're going to have 2 different schools kind of side by side, or was it going to be a big mega 1,200 capacity school? Well, what are these other things going to look like? We haven't even talked about those. I know there's been some recent discussion about combining, 48 and middle school 15 into a single campus type of thing. Be good to have. I would think it'd be good to have some more input before we go, handing out some of these contracts. So.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I believe what we're bringing to you tonight is sort of a K-12 best practice. What I really want to not get into a situation is to not move forward with the design and then find ourselves behind the curve. And so I would much rather, I know based on the current demographic data that we need these schools. Last year we bought 23 portables to support not having these schools in place. And so I think it's a best practice to get out of the gate, get the design moving, and we can always pull back. It's easier to pull back than to get moving on something like this. And so that's why we're recommending the path we're recommending.
A part of the schedule was driven by the dates that was outlined in your capital improvement plan, because you had dates that you wanted to occupy certain facilities. So that was actually the starting point, and we engineered in reverse to meet those dates.
Right. The economy has slightly changed a little bit since then.
A little bit.
So, a lot.
All right, let's see who else has questions. Mrs. Tossan.
So it sounds like we're tracking on the same page here, because those are exactly some of the questions and comments that I had. My initial kind of springboarding off of Mr. Rosenthal's comments, I absolutely agree that we need these schools and we have space issues and we need to move forward. I'm very concerned if we move forward and don't have appropriate design guidelines and standards and ed specs in place. We talked about this before a few months ago, and I did bring up some concerns about collaborative space and special ed and what's learning going to look like in the future, not just from a technology standpoint, but from a how we actually are doing education standpoint. I know that we have some things going on in special ed right now. Some of that's going to change. We're going to have a new director come in. And so what is our program going to look like in the future, and how are we building schools to support that? If we get designs out there and they're not supporting that, and we're just doing same old, I don't know that I can support that. And I'll just, I'm just being completely frank here. I just don't know that I can support that. We've already talked about being behind the curve on technology. We've talked about, we are admittedly behind the curve in several areas. And I think if we don't get these ed specs on paper and get them right, then we're going to be designing and building schools that are behind the curve anyway. So that would be my initial comments on that. I think the idea of having a board workshop and maybe discussing what our input would be to maybe inform you guys as you move forward and put these things together, I think is a great idea. I'll just say it, I'm in favor of including teachers and including curriculum instruction and including the people that are going to actually be doing the work in the classrooms to make sure that we're designing these things to benefit our kids in the future. Prototypical, I hear that and I understand it, but I want to make sure we're not using prototypical of the past and that we're using that for the future in technology and curriculum instruction. We've got some changes coming, I know, in our English second language program. So what is that going to look like? How are we going to do that going forward? Do we need extra space in the pods to support that? Do we not need to do pods at all? What is that going to look like going forward? So I do have some questions about a lot of this and, would like to see that laid out a little more specifically. And I think architects are going to need to see that. And, as we're doing these bid packages and getting these proposals out there, I know I would feel more comfortable as a board member voting on these things if I know what that's going to look like. And that we make sure that the architects we're choosing and the other vendors we're choosing understand what it is that we're looking for and don't just bring us, designs of the past. So those are
They could potentially participate in the workshop you're describing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think we need to, we've talked about a lot. Even before I got on the board last year, we started making these changes when Dr. Dupree came in, and, we've got a lot of this planning done, and it's all been excellent work. And so I just want to make sure that as we're designing and constructing these schools going forward, that we're using that to guide us as we make these decisions. And it's hard as a board member, sometimes it's a little disconnected and we have to kind of gather it all back together ourselves. And so as we're doing that and looking at all the plans that we have, I think it would be a good idea to get our ed specs and these guidelines down so that we all understand where we're going, and then, you guys can do better work that way. So that's my 2 cents.
Mind if I interject something?
No,
Or do
go
you-
ahead.
I like what you just said, Ms. Tassan, about things kind of sometimes feel disconnected because the board's not actively engaged with this work every day the way we are. And so we always try to be mindful of that as we make presentations to the board. So what I'd like to do perhaps is kind of just step back a minute, because we did make commitments to this community when they passed the bond, that these buildings would be built within a certain time frame. And certainly, we're going to be mindful of the economy and those issues. But I think the biggest issue that we had with the Bond Oversight Committee and the community in putting this bond package together is that we need all of these elementaries 3 years ago. Even no matter what happens with the economy, we are already over capacity with so many portables. I don't think anything is going to slow down enough that we're not going to need these schools. Now, moving into stage 2 of the capital plan is a different issue, and we'll address that in 3 or 4 years. But I think our goal, our sense of direction from the board from the beginning was that we need to get caught up and stay ahead of the curve. So with the Sprint Start program that they've put together, it's all been designed to do that. The bond passed, we hired Jacobs as expeditiously as we could, and now the staff is working with Jacobs to get these projects moving right away. I don't know that we're communicating effectively in a few areas, and that's not to be critical of Max and Ron, but without a doubt, the ed specs are the most critical piece of all of this. That work is underway, and there won't be a building design put forth any effort on any design until those are done and approved by the board. And I heard the board's concern about having maybe even a workshop, and absolutely, we welcome that, because that is a very, very dense document that's going to take some time for the board to get through. So the design standards and the ed specs, that is coming within a month or two. We set that up. But I think what we need to be doing now, and you can see all the work here, is we want to get these architects hired. We want to get these folks on board, because once you would take action potentially next Monday, we still then have to negotiate contracts. And so there's still time built in. If we were to postpone that till summer, then we're losing track on all these buildings that we have committed to have open in 2017. And we need construction time because you've got to build in all of the bid, the construction selection, all of that. So we're already pressing the envelope on time. So I think I say all that because I want the board to have no question at all that we're going to follow policy in terms of starting new buildings and all of those things, because you've adopted policy on that, and we're going to be mindful of that when we bring forward to you the actual contracts and the schematic designs before any dirt moves on any of these schools. We'll have a refresh on the demographic data to make sure everyone feels good that, yes, it's time and in this place to build that school. We will have the board fully vested and approved in the design specs. That include, absolutely, we always include educators. It is never architects working independent. And we never forget that we as a district are the owner of the building. I have never worked with an architect where I let them just come in and sell us on designs. We hold them accountable to our design standards and our needs for our children in our district. So I just want to make sure the board is very clear. We've been listening. I like what you said, though, as I mentioned earlier. I do understand sometimes you get a document, you hear a report, and we haven't talked about these things in a period of time. But I want you to have faith. We're here to provide you all the support you need. If it's workshops, if it's more Q&A, but you need to know everyone on this team is working diligently to address your policies and your expectations in the way that you. So I don't want to have any doubt about that.
So your point's well taken, and I appreciate that explanation, because some of the disconnect is that I know that we've made several comments over the last few months when we talk about ed specs and we talk about some of these guidelines, and that's not something that we've seen or really been updated on. So it is helpful to know that those things are moving forward, and maybe for us to get our expectations out there a little bit, because I know, we do need the schools. We did make some commitments in the bond from a timing perspective, but I think we also have a responsibility to the community to make sure that we are doing it properly so that we don't have a misstep. And I know I personally don't want to get in such a rush to meet the timeline that we're not meeting the standards of quality in education. And I'm not saying that you do. I think we're saying the same thing. Maybe I just want to make sure that, that my point's clear, that I get the timing aspect of it, but personally, I would rather make sure we do it right the first time. And it sounds like you guys are working towards that, and maybe we just need to be brought back into the loop on some of those ed specs to make sure everything's being considered that's in our head.
Right. And I agree also that you're right. We do need the schools, We just need to make sure that they're not way overbuilt or way underbuilt, because that's kind of why we're where we're at. One of those.
And I would just say, I appreciate what you're saying, Dr. Dupree, but the design and technical standards tell us what kind of floors to put in and what kind of roofs and windows, and that's not about 21st century design. And the ed specs tell us how many square feet we have per student. How many is that, Ron? How many square feet do we have per student allocated?
You know,
And what's the add-on factor? And it tells us things like, if we're going to teach science, how many science classrooms are we going to have in elementary schools? But it doesn't tell us what the design is. And so we really need to see the design, because, you know, the 20th century model is the sage on the stage. All the kids are in the classroom and the teacher is lecturing, and that has to change. Now that's changing. I mean, I go to these seminars and I hear that all the time. So they're in class for some period of time, and then they're in collaborative spaces where they're working together on projects. They're doing homework at school, not at home, at school, and they're learning at home. Okay, so it's a different way of thinking, and if we don't embrace that, if we don't at least pay attention to what educational experts are talking about when designing these new buildings, then we're going to have prototypical schools that were done in time that are 20th century design and don't meet the needs. And Fort Bend, our kids deserve better than that. So I think that we can still move forward with all of this, but that we need to see what these designs are going to look like so that we can be fully apprised of them. So what's the square footage?
Yes, sir, for elementary 47, it's 127 and a half square feet per student.
Wow, that's low. What's the add-on factor?
I don't know that. I understand the
Circulation,
question.
mechanical rooms, and that kind of thing.
That's total square footage divided by students right there.
Okay, well, we really need to look at the ed specs to come up with that number. What's our cost per square foot?
Okay, now that's we have answered an email earlier in the week, and that really depends on how you do your math. It ranges somewhere from about 194 to 206.
Okay, we can talk about that later. And then lastly, I appreciate this schedule, but you got to either give me a magnifying glass with it or a bigger printout.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, Mrs. Bailey, let's keep going, Mrs. Bailey.
I just have a couple questions. On 46, and you don't have to answer it right now, but were there a lot of change orders?
The school is still being built, and there haven't been an excessive amount of change orders, no, ma'am.
Okay. How much does LEED cost us on a school?
I don't have any data to talk to from tonight, but that's something we could certainly put together. What I'm hearing at conferences and in the field, somewhere between 1% and 2%.
And what are the benefits of LEED?
Well, Elementary 46 was actually my first LEED project. The last school district I was at did not support that effort. To me, the biggest benefit of LEED is the energy modeling, meaning you get the most energy efficient building you can.
Wouldn't our architect design a building these days to be energy efficient?
Yes,
Just
ma'am,
like
there
the
are.
homes we buy, and I would think the architect would make sure it's energy efficient.
Absolutely.
So what does LEED get us?
The energy code has minimum energy requirements. LEED is generally above that.
So if we're making a building with really high ceilings, we still need to have it LEED certified? When you consider the architect, I'm just going to our past schools, Travis High School, Ridge Point, with the huge ceilings.
I'm not sure I understand your question
Well,
regarding high
you can-
ceilings and LEED.
Well, you can build a building energy efficient, meaning you don't have these huge high ceilings in there where you're circulating the air, just like having a house with a high ceiling. Obviously, it's not going to be as energy efficient as a house that has lower ceilings. So I would ask the board going forward as a district? Do we want LEED certified? What does it give us?
Well, since you brought it up, I'm happy to weigh in on that, Mrs.
Well, I'm
Bailey.
sure, because you have a lead company, so I'm sure you would. But let me go on.
Sure.
Of course, we only saw the schematic design on 47, but I just want to make the fellow trustees aware that we talk about these ed specs, all right, going forward in our schools, but let's remember about our current schools. They're not brought up to ed specs. So our special ed population is not only at these new schools, our special ed population is at all schools. Also, when we think about, flip learning and, I forget what the word is for it, but, remember, our older schools don't have that. So this needs to be addressed too. And I don't know if that requires an architect, engineer, if it was in the Phase 2 bond. I can't even remember where it was. But it's great going forward, building these wonderful, beautiful 21st century schools. And we have a lot of kids still in older schools that won't have that benefit. So I just want to make sure you keep that cost in mind, as these ed specs get bigger and bigger. And I just think everything needs to be equitable across the district on that one. And I guess just going back to selecting the architects, when we go to build the next elementary school, wherever that will be, because that depends on the PASA data, where I'm just seeing a lot of building up north, Mission area. So I just don't know where that new school is going to be. I guess if they don't have updated specs, they really can't start on their design, can they?
Correct. That's our first, and our next thing we're doing is working on those specs actively right now.
So we're going to pick the architect, then give him the ed specs.
That's correct. And Ms. Bailey, the other item that, from my perspective, since I also in my career have been responsible for facilities maintenance, I see the LEED buildings as providing really good durable materials that are easy to maintain. I think that's the other big advantage, and probably then the last advantage I see is the concept of daylighting as many spaces as possible, because there's information out there that does help students to learn better when there's daylight present. And so
Which is not in the majority of our schools right now.
To me, those are the three things that LEED brings: is the energy, the durable materials, and the daylighting. And there's a whole series of other things, but just in general terms, I think that's my biggest three, from my opinion.
I'm just worried. I mean, I'm just concerned when you talk about LEED. It's just my personal opinion. I'm not going to argue it up here with anyone. I just think it's common sense how to design a building with durable materials. I think you definitely would know, the experience you had, what kind of materials you're going to use in that school. You don't need someone to come in to just certify it. So that's just the way I feel. Like I said, I'm not here to debate it. That just adds to our overall cost and money that could go somewhere else.
Mr. George.
Excuse me. I appreciate it is a good presentation, but at the same time, I share the same concern Mr. Rosenthal and Mr. Tassan mentioned. I looked at a lot of this information. I don't feel comfortable, to be very honest, I don't feel comfortable voting on it next Monday. First of all, as you mentioned, I know I'm going to talk about it later in the meeting, but I strongly believe teacher and other respective people's input into design is very important, and I think you mentioned you can incorporate that, but that does means, or I understand it, we are not doing it at the moment. Is that correct?
No, for elementary 47, we did. We brought in educational staff, Dr. Whitbeck, Dr. Hill, the principals,
What-
department specialists, so we didn't do it in a vacuum, but the specific question was teachers, and I cannot remember if teachers were bought in on 47, I am not sure, but like I said, I have done that in the past. In our architectural interviews and in looking at all of the qualifications, most of the architects out there are comfortable doing what they call a design charrette, where they do bring everyone in and they talk about it, and they cut out shapes and see how things fit, how does the cafeteria fit relative to the gym and to the quiet spaces. And so the architects can deliver those type of a process, and it is a good idea, and I've done it in the past.
Okay, and also I see there is a list of ranking is being presented to us, but I don't see a scorecard on architects. And I see that from the top, if you really look at the top 10, at least one or two companies are brand new, we never did business with. Is that right?
Are you
I'm talking about the page number,
in the agenda?
I believe 8.
In the agenda or in the
Yeah,
presentation?
agenda item. I mean, maybe I could talk about it when we come back to that item. I could go there, I could wait. That is not a problem. Probably, maybe I'm jumping ahead with item number, I believe, maybe 47 on page 13 or 5. So maybe I should wait. But coming back to my comment, I totally share that concern others are mentioning because we like to have, Mr. Rice mentioned about 21st century education, 21st century classrooms, and I 100% agree with that. And also special education, when you are planning that, how do you do that? And then again, I'm not an expert on none of these things, so we like to know more. I like to know more before.
Right. Thank you, Mr. George.
We are taking on that task. Okay, thank you, appreciate your help.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Verdeen.
I just need to educate myself on our current ed specs. Can I get a copy of that, or is that accessible online, or?
We have it in an electronic document. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet, and we can get you what we have now, or we can wait until we have crafted the next version and give it to you, however you would like to have it.
I think we'll provide it to the board this week, because I
Okay.
do think if you can get familiar with it, then that'll help the
Yeah,
conversation when we do the full discussion.
I'm just not educated enough on it for me to really have an opinion so far, so.
And we touched on it briefly in, I believe it was January, when we did the design and construction overview. So there's a small snippet from each one of the elementary, middle, and high in there, in that, but we'll provide it this week.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have a question? All right. I have two things. One, I'd like to pick up on something that Mrs. Bailey said, and that is the renovations that we're doing. Some of those are, and some of it is roofing and things like that, and that's important. We want to be energy efficient. But we've also got quite a number of classroom addition projects in this, and obviously we want to blend those with the existing schools. But I don't know. I guess it's just another piece of the puzzle of how do we make these renovations such that they have the maximum benefit. I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we don't want there to become a situation where we've got the new schools, the good schools, and the other schools that are old and, having trouble with, lots of lots of problems, which we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I guess, months. So those are my comments on that. The other thing I was looking for on this, we have quite a bit of money in our bond for career and technical education. I didn't really, maybe I couldn't see it because as Mr. Rice pointed out, there's a lot of very small print. But do we have any of that included in here on the,
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Plan and-
I'm going to just show it like this because it's this very bottom long bar
Okay.
sticking out down here. I received emails actually on Saturday from Meredith Wadisek. I believe the first 3 career and technology planning meetings have been put on the calendar for Fort Bend ISD, so that's starting quickly. That's beginning quickly, the planning for that.
Okay. And I guess the thing that comes again to my mind is we've heard different ideas about, are we doing different thing, putting wings on schools or doing renovations in schools? Are we doing a center? I don't know what this is, but is that a conversation that the board needs to have, or someone else is having that conversation, or what's going on?
Well, we're handling that the way we've handled some of our other planning. We're doing some pre-work, and then we're going to bring it to the board, our initial thinking, and then the board absolutely will weigh in on options. So the board can have an informed discussion, about that fits into the overall plan for the district.
Okay. But more to come.
Lots more to come.
Lots more to come.
All right. Mrs. Hassan, I lost my train of thought.
One comment, I would agree with Ms. Bailey's and Ms. James's concerns about the existing school, so I'll just leave it at that. But this was a presentation you guys said you presented to the Board Oversight Committee, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And were there issues raised, or what was discussed with the Bond Oversight Committee? I see we have a member here. I don't know if he's here to speak, or if you guys are
He
going to.
actually was not at the meeting that day.
Okay, so he wasn't there. So what was discussed with the Bond Oversight Committee, and were there any issues or concerns that were brought up, or things that we need to be made aware of that were discussed?
With anything in particular, or just in general?
In general, with what's been presented so far. I mean, I assume they were given this timeline and the things that you just presented to us, so was there anything that stood out? Because I guess part of the disconnect that I was talking about earlier is we weren't there, didn't hear it. I assume this was vetted and they had some conversations about it. Was there anything that stood out? Any conversations that were had that perhaps we should, or opinions that were expressed that we should be made
they
aware
may
of?
want to jump in. My perception was that there was general support. There was questions like you've had about certain things, but there wasn't any major of concern. There was nothing where they asked us to rework or reconsider or reevaluate. They all seemed to understand where we were, what we were accomplishing.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I was going to say I have just small notes, but nothing big that caused me to have to come back and do a memo or anything like that. No, ma'am.
Just from my perspective, the most substantive thing was with regard to reporting.
Okay.
Okay. But other than that, it was very supportive.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are we ready to go on to the next set of slides?
Okay. Next set is just a one-pager is actually the Elementary School 47 update. Of course, we are actually we're talking about the GMP amendment tonight. Basically, this just has some project milestones, and it shows, when the board approved the schematic design, when the construction documents were completed. We got the GMP in early April. Our desire is to start construction in May, and then August of 2016, which is right around the corner, we want to occupy the facility. And then the chart on the bottom right called the cost journey. What that shows is the pricing at each phase of design. At SD, at DD, it's 60% CD and 90% CD. So our construction manager gave us
CD and SD.
I'm sorry.
Construction documents.
Schematic design, design development, construction documents, and construction documents. I apologize. What that slide is to show is that our construction manager at risk gave us gave us cost estimates along the way, and that's why it's called a cost journey. So we'll be talking a lot more about Elementary 47 during the workshop, but are there any questions on this slide?
I
Okay.
think we can.
So we're moving on to update of other projects, and Mr. Pham has the microphone first.
Yes, so I will hopefully able to speak on behalf, chief's behalf. The security cameras, right now, the RFP for the request for proposal process is completed to choose a video vendor. And the presentation will be made to the board next week for your approval and consideration. We will be needing at least 2 to 4 petabytes in order to initially meet the demand of the cameras, as well as the internal. So the RFP for storage will be initiated toward the beginning of summer, and hopefully we'll bring a recommendation and seek the board's approval sometime mid-summer to be installed and commissioned by the start of school. Okay. The security camera cabling will be part of the big cabling project that will include cabling for the cameras as well as the wireless. Our task is to open the ceiling one time only and install whatever needs to be run up in the ceiling one time. So that way we minimize the school or minimize the interaction with the school. The wire area network backbone campus refresh, we are bringing to the board tonight, or actually kind of give you a preview and ask for your consideration and approval for the Cisco equipment to build out the backbone, upgrade the backbone to handle the wireless bandwidth as well as the camera bandwidth. So this backbone is needed in order to get all of the data traffic that's being demanded by these two new initiatives. As for the wireless, the board approved the purchase of wireless access point in January 2015. That was the E-rate portion. And the campus and the administrative building will be divided into 3 CSP for an RFP, which is the, I guess, what CSP stands for? Competitive seal bid.
Oh.
That's, anyway, so what we're going to do is we're planning to divide it up into 3 CSPs, so that way we can pick 3 vendors, award 3 vendors, or 1 vendor who can do all 3. We don't know what that looks like yet. The cabling, hopefully we will be able to bring it to the board for consideration and approval in May, so that way we can get started the cabling project in June and take advantage of June, July, and the summer to finish the high school. That's pretty much the summary of the security camera and the wireless.
Do we have any questions on any of those project updates? Rice?
Nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question.
Mr. Rosenthal has a
So
question.
So the cabling is for the wireless access points?
Wireless access point and the cameras at the school, sir.
Okay, and which of those high schools? Are you starting with all high schools first?
Oh, high school this summer. That's correct, sir. And then after high school, we're going to proceed with middle schools. And then from middle school, after that, we're going to do the elementary and then all the auxiliary buildings.
Okay, so we'll be able to walk into a high school after the end of the summer and actually be able to find a network, a wireless network?
Well, that was just the cabling. After the cabling, then we'll install the access point and then configure the access point to talk to the system itself. So to answer your question is hopefully by the end of the calendar year, we would have Wi-Fi throughout all of the high school. So we're going to start commissioning as they complete the cabling and as we install all of the access point.
Got it. Thank you.
Just one question. So when we finally finish laying the cabling and the wireless access points, so a student can go into their classroom, boot up their iPad, and get internet.
Yes, ma'am.
You're promising that?
I promise as soon as the system is up.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring a whole class of students to you
I'm,
if you don't fulfill your promise.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Have him substitute teach a little bit, and then he'll
I know it's a hard project.
get back to IT, and I'll get that all wireless
I know it's a
going.
hard project.
Actually, I have been getting a lot of student requests for Wi-Fi, so yes, they already got
Go
me on their
students.
targets. Yes.
All right, anything else? Okay, next,
Yes, ma'am. I'll finish this one up. I'm covering the bus GPS project. Just a reminder, the estimated budget originally was $128,000, and the actual board-approved number came in at $283,000. The reason for that was a previous director believed that we could do that work ourselves, installing that ourselves. And it's come to pass that we are short drivers and our mechanics have to drive, and so that was not actually a good solution. So that's why the budget came in like it did. But the good news is the installation is underway, scheduled for completion by the end of the month. And to remind you, that's on 480 buses and 20 vehicles, the transportation white fleet vehicles, the Suburbans or the Tahoes. Zonar training will be provided to our staff in May, so coming right up. And technology department has been assisting along the way to make this a great project. Just there's a lot of benefits, but I just want to point out a couple of the benefits that are important to me. The top one, the store's historical data for route analysis used to develop and refine bus routes. Basically, GPS is a tool for a modern bus fleet as a hammer would be for a carpenter. It's something that we just really are going to be able to increase our productivity, increase routing, do a lot of things with this data that comes in real time, and we can hold it historically. The second one is this resolves speeding complaints. You know, we will literally be able to track where a bus is, how fast they're going, what time they got to a bus stop. So parent complaints about a bus being late or early, we'll be able to verify real time and get back to them right on the phone right then. And then likewise, the bottom one here, alerts for speeding, entering and exiting predefined zoned areas. So literally on the map, you could put what they call a geo fence, and if a vehicle crosses an imaginary line on the map, it alerts us that vehicle is somewhere where it shouldn't be. And so we're really looking forward to that project, and it's coming up immediately.
Like at the First Colony Mall the other day?
That'd be a good example if they weren't supposed to be there.
or the one I saw today that didn't stop at the railroad crossing, that would be another one.
Yes, ma'am. Now that one is, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd like that bus number if you can commit that to memory.
Of course, you do know that high schoolers, if you're even 5 minutes late, that's 5 minutes more of sleep for them.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
they are very, very conscious of late buses.
Yes, ma'am. And this will, in all seriousness, this is going to improve our system a lot. We're looking forward to.
You know I'm going to test you on that, too.
Yeah, yes,
Just
ma'am.
like Long.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Any questions on that one?
Any more questions on this? All right,
That concludes my portion, and I'm turning it over to Mr.
passing the
Bassett.
baton.
Yes, ma'am.
Could we maybe take about a 2-minute break? How long is your presentation? I don't know how many pages.
Let's see. We're on, what slide are we on?
What do you think?
5 through, we got another 20 slides. We have another 20 slides, ma'am.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break, please.